The sound you hear is what some experts claim to be a Bigfoot scream. Recorded in the state of Washington by a group of campers in 1971, it is regarded as the highest quality audio of the creature ever captured.
Hello, welcome to Bigfoot Real Encounters. We're glad to have you stop by. We'd also like to take this time to invite you to share your encounter. You can send your stories to the email bfrealencounters@mail.com, where we will feature your story with all of the respect that it deserves. So send your stories in, bfrealencounters@mail.com. We look forward to hearing from you and your great stories soon. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Bigfoot Real Encounters. I'm Chris, your host, and it's time that we get back into some Bigfoot stories here. Today I have a story which was submitted to the BFRO website. I'm resorting to this because we've not had anything emailed into us lately, which brings me to this. If you or somebody you know has had a Bigfoot encounter or suspected Bigfoot encounter, strange happenings or whatnot, please send them in to bfrealencounters@mail.com. We will read your stories faithful to you, word for word. And other than curse words, I'm not going to put those in. I'll substitute those. But we'll get your story out faithful to you, and we'll not leave things out like any type of controversial details. Some websites are known to have done that type of thing. So send your encounters in that we can share with others so that we can get the word out, because you deserve to be heard. So let's get into this here. As I stated, this is a report that was on the BFRO website. I thought I'd go back to my home state of Ohio. This is in Stark County, the county that I live in. And this incident took place back in the year 2011 in September. It's probably within 10 to 15 minutes of where I live right now. So I thought I'd go back to my hometown area and see what's near me. So let's take a look at this. This reads, it was toward the end of summer in September 2011 that I had my sighting of a tall, hairy, bipedal creature. I went to bed around 9:30 p.m. on September 5th, and it was a warm summer night, approximately 70 degrees outside. I usually don't get much sleep, and as I get older, it just seems to get worse the older I get. I had awakened about 2 a.m. In the early morning on the 6th, I had decided to go outside and smoke a cigarette, because I just don't smoke in my house. I proceeded to the living room where the French doors are located to go out the rear deck on my house that is positioned on the southeast corner of my house. I walked out on the rear deck and I stood there just in front of the French doors where the ashtray was sitting on the handrail, and I noticed that the moon was mostly full and set in place, and that the temperature was rather warm. I was facing my backyard and enjoying the moonlight, and I might have been there for approximately 2 to 3 minutes when I heard a low, guttural growl coming from my left from the cornfield. I live on a dead-end street, and the property that is located beside me is a cornfield that belongs to a gentleman that lives up the street. There is a single line of large pine trees that divide my property from the cornfield, and as I looked over to my left after hearing the growl, I couldn't see anything, even though the moon was shining in my direction. I still continued to stand there, and about 1 minute later, I heard this low, guttural growl once again. I proceeded to extinguish my cigarette and walk back into the house, not telling anyone about what happened. The next night, I went to bed approximately 10 p.m., and again, I couldn't sleep and had awakened around 1 a.m., and I got up and headed out to the rear deck, totally dismissing what I had encountered the previous night. I was standing in the same area again, enjoying the warm night, and the moon was only showing at about 60%, but it was still bright and very little clouds that night. The same thing occurred again. It must have been a few minutes as I stood there and I heard the low, guttural growl coming from the same area from my left. This time, it seemed to be a bit louder, and I looked over between the pine trees, but I couldn't see anything but darkness. I originally thought it might have been a bear, but after checking bear sightings, I dismissed that because none has been reported from my area. At this time, I'm getting a little nervous because whatever this was, it sounded extremely large and seemed to have a large set of lungs. I proceeded back into the house, and just as I entered through the door, my wife had gotten up, and she was headed to the door to go out to the rear deck. I stopped her and told her about the growls that I had been experiencing that night and the previous night. She replied with, "I know, I heard them before," and with a look on my face, I thanked her for not telling me. I hadn't gone outside at night for the rest of the week because I had no idea what was lurking in the shadows, and I didn't know if it was still hanging around. The next day, I had contacted my oldest son and told him what was going on around the house, and he said he would come over on Friday, the 9th, after work, and we would check things out. Now it's Friday the 9th, and I got home from work about 5:30 that day, and my oldest son was already at my house waiting on me. We proceeded to walk through the tree line that connects the southeastern corner of my backyard, and it runs along the edge of the cornfield. And as we were walking through, we started to notice strange stick structures that did not make sense, and it seemed to rule out something done by nature. We finally got to the end of the tree line, and it meets a large field with tall grass that gets 5 to 6 feet high, and part of it seems to be swampy and has some cattails growing on one side. The temperature that day was warm and sunny with very little cloud cover and no rain, but the ground of the field still seemed to be wet and muddy and definitely a paradise for ticks. My son and I made it partially through the field, and we stopped to look across the field toward the wooded area, and we were facing the southeastern direction over at some crabapple trees that were located on the tree line on the other side of the field. We were standing side by side, and out of my peripheral vision, I noticed some movement. Out of the corner of my left eye at the edge of the tree line that was approximately 200 feet from where we were standing. I asked my son if he had seen the movement as I pointed in the direction of the wooded area, and he replied, "No, I didn't see it." Then I said, "Let's go investigate that and see what it could have been." It was about 5:50 p.m. By that time, I didn't know if it was deer or anything else because I just saw the movement but couldn't tell shape or color of the subject in question. We finally made it through the field to the tree line, and there was a small creek about 3 foot wide with very little water flowing through it. And we also noticed a trail where the deer had been crossing that creek in the same area, and it was heavily traveled because the tree roots were showing. We both jumped across the narrow creek and started to walk the deer trail which followed the edge of the narrow creek, and I told my son that I was going to check the creek's edge for any type of prints because I know I had seen something move over in that area. my son elected to wait up on the trail while I was searching the creek's edge. I was looking on both sides of the creek edge when my son alerted me and wanted me to come look at something that was odd to him. So I proceeded up the small embankment and walked over to where he was standing. He said, "Stand where I am and follow the creek down to a large tree on the creek's edge and tell me what that is." I looked down to the tree, which was about a good 300 feet, and I noticed something dark that seemed to be squatting behind the tree, but I couldn't tell what it was. But I know it wasn't moving, so I dismissed it as a log or tree stump. I went back to the creek's edge to continue looking for any type of prints in the soft mud, but came up empty-handed. I told him we should go into the woods a little deeper, just to see what else we could find. And I walked back up to the deer trail, and just for curiosity, I went to the spot where I previously stood to look down to the large tree where we both saw the dark object, and this time the area looked different. We walked the deer trail, which followed the narrow creek, and had noticed the narrow creek tees into a larger creek that was about 15 foot wide, but we didn't see a good spot to cross until we followed it a little farther, and we had found a shallow spot that we could cross. Once we crossed the larger creek, we split up, and I headed south and he headed north. And I had been looking around for about 5 minutes, and I heard him call my name and wanted me to go to his location. I walked over to where he was, and he was standing in a small clearing that had the greenest grass I had ever seen. And this clearing was surrounded by thick brush in the shape of a U. He had noticed an unbearable smell in the area, and he asked me if I could smell it, and I replied, "Yeah." But then I asked him what it was because we couldn't pinpoint what type of smell it was, because it had a combined odor of rotten eggs and rotted flesh. We both started searching that immediate area for a possible dead animal or anything that could have made that nasty odor. We did not come up with anything, and it was starting to get about 6:30 that night. So I told him we should go, but we can come back another time, and he agreed. We went back to the large creek and crossed over and walked along the deer trail until we got about 20 feet from the area that we had originally crossed, the small creek that took us to the field with the tall grass, and he was walking in front of me, and he stopped, and he was looking to his left, and I asked what he was doing. He said, "Look." And as I looked over to my left, I could not see what he was looking at. So I asked him again what he was looking at, and he pointed to his left and told me to look with a more stern voice, but yet again, I couldn't see because I had a tree and a limb covered with leaves obstructing my view. I hunched down about 6 to 8 inches to look below the limb, and about 100 feet from us we saw a huge, hairy creature standing in a bipedal fashion with a forward gait, staring in our direction. There wasn't much between us and this creature, but some brush and small saplings, and as we stood there in amazement because of the size of this human-looking creature, I asked my son what it was doing, and he replied, "It's moving its upper body back and forth." At this time, I really don't think that it had set in our minds what we were exactly looking at, but I can say that it seemed as though time stopped, and I have no idea how long we actually viewed this thing. We both just stood there and watched this thing, and we never moved an inch because I think we were in shock from the massive size. This unexplained creature appeared to be at least 7.5 feet tall and had to weigh a minimum of 600 pounds. The hair was a dark reddish brown, and it had a matted and dirty look to it, and most of his face was covered with hair, but from what you could see, it appeared to be of human traits. The ears were covered with hair, and it was standing at an angle to us, but I could see the legs were extremely muscular and large, and the arm's length seemed to go just slightly past the knees. I just couldn't help but stare at this creature because I couldn't believe the size and just how big it was. I believed that as it was swaying its upper body back and forth, because I knew that it knew that we were there, but I don't think it knew what our exact location was. And it was trying to find us as we were kind of hidden behind some brush. It seemed as my son and myself broke out of some type of hypnosis. I looked at my son and said, "We need to go." He agreed. He was running, but I told him not to run and that we would walk out, but we could keep an eye and see if we were going to be followed. We finally made it to the small creek and jumped across and headed across the field with the tall grass as we kept looking behind us to see if we were being followed, but did not notice anything. We made it across the field and took a shortcut through the cornfield, and as we both stepped into my backyard, we turned around and looked in the direction of where we just came from, and just slightly north of us in the wooded area, we both heard two really loud tree knocks. And my son looked at me and asked if I heard that, and I said, yes, I did. To this day, I will never forget what I had seen that day, and I will remember it like it was yesterday, and nobody can convince me that it was anything else other than what we call Bigfoot. From that day, I vowed to become a researcher in the Bigfoot world, and my goal is to get enough proof of this creature so it can be recognized to mainstream science and documented so we can protect this creature and its habitat. Wow, what a story. And not 10 minutes from where I live. This is really interesting. I would like to point out that these people had a time distortion event take place. Now, some of the stories that I've been hearing, I like to listen to Steve Isdall from howtohunt.com, as well as Scott Carpenter, and those two have both mentioned loss of time in relation to some encounters of Bigfoot. And here's an incident from 2011. I think this was posted in 2013, but still, that's several years back, and they mentioned this time element, and also that the Bigfoot swayed back and forth during this time, and they felt like it was a hypnotic trance type of a deal. Now that is something that I've also heard in other stories where people have seen the Bigfoot swaying back and forth, and they get an odd sensation of a trance type of thing and can't move, and many weird things happen like that. Now these are things that we need to pass along. This is information that is vital to each and every one of us. As you can see, the city of Canton, Ohio is not wilderness. It's a rather large city. The Pro Football Hall of Fame is within 10 minutes of this event where this took place. I mean, it's a bustling city. There's a lot of traffic. There's neighborhoods and everything. So these things live on the fringes of society, or at least they visit the fringes of society. They watch us. So the opportunities for us to have an encounter with them are higher than what you would think. And we need to have this information so if we do come across them, just a walk in the park and there they are, we need to be aware and ready that these type of odd things can happen in association with these creatures. We can prepare ourselves, and so that we can not have a bad experience, which a lot of people have bad experiences with Bigfoot. I'm sorry to say it. I kind of romanticized the creatures when I was young and watching In Search Of and other things in the Boggy Creek type of thing. Well, that was kind of a scary movie. I always thought it would be cool to have one for a friend or to discover some other unknown animal type of thing, but the more we look into it, it doesn't seem to be that type of a case, and most encounters end up being negative. So we need to get the information out to other folks, so we're not going to be hearing it from mainstream sources. So we'll tell each other about it through these stories and share your encounters. And I know there's probably somebody out there listening right now who's had an encounter, and you're just sitting back listening and waiting and listening to these stories and seeing how I present it, and you're considering sharing one of your stories. Well, I would like to encourage you to do so, because your story deserves to be told, and people out there need to hear what you encountered to help them. Now, if you're listening to me, you've listened to others on the internet and other YouTube channels doing the same thing. You're probably well versed in some of these stories and how things are going right now. So let's share these stories with everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Once again, another great story. Thanks for tuning in. Please share your encounter. Email us, bfrealencounters@mail.com. Your story is very important. We will treat it with the respect that it deserves. Also, be sure to smash the like button, share, and subscribe. Thanks once again. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Watch out for our next video. Maybe we'll feature yours. Have a great day.